Sometimes your dynasty and redraft fantasy football rankings just don't match up. We discuss why players like Rachaad White, Dak Prescott, and even Jet star wide receiver Garrett Wilson might just be better suited for your redraft leagues over your dynasty rosters. Only here on today's Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Magdziuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We'd like to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. My name is Kate Magdziuk. When I'm not doing this, I work as an editor and analyst with Yahoo Fantasy. And joining me today is a very special guest, Michelle Magdziuk, researcher of NFL Network, co-host of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast, and of course, my wife. On today's show, we're going to be talking about several assets that we're kind of not digging in Dynasty nearly as much as we're digging them in redraft leagues. So let's dive into it. Michelle, you have come to the table with some very spicy picks. So I think it's only fair that we start out with the absolute spiciest pick. Let's talk about New York Jets wide receiver Garrett Wilson and why you actually prefer him in redraft over Dynasty.
I'm willing to take a chance on Garrett Wilson this season to finally be what he's supposed to be, right? Like we see the talent on the field for sure, but it hasn't come to fruition with his stats. And a lot of it's because, yes, he's getting terrible targets. But last year, he was fourth in the league in targets, finished as the wide receiver 40 in fantasy points per game and half PPR. And he had one weekly finish as a top 15 wide receiver. And he was a wide receiver 10. That was the highest finish he had all year long. And I have him jumping very high in my redraft rankings. I have him at wide receiver 11, which is lower than consensus, but I'm still okay with taking him in redraft. But what if Aaron Rodgers only has 1 year left? What if Rodgers isn't what we think he's going to be, coming off this Achilles? Like, yeah, it'll be better for Garrett Wilson this year, but how long will that goodness last? I'm not sure. So I'm like, if I have Garrett Wilson in Dynasty leagues, which I had a lot of shares of, I'm trying to kind of move on from him right now. It's not to just say trade him for anything. He's still getting elite value. Like he has elite value right now without putting up elite performance. So I'm trying to trade him right now for someone else with elite value, like a Malik Neighbors. Maybe if you do a Wilson plus a first, you can get a Marvin Harrison Jr. But like, I'm trying to upgrade him right now before the end of this season where he could lose his quarterback again.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. So you look at, the quarterback play. Obviously, I think that's been the biggest barrier to Wilson's success overall so far for fantasy. But I mean, 12th percentile in terms of catchable target rate so far over the past 2 seasons. With the Jets, he just has not gotten catchable targets. Only 66.9% of those targets were graded as catchable per PFF. So that essentially cuts your target share, which is one of the top in the National Football League. Put that into 2/3 of what you're actually getting, because that's the only portion of it that's actually, you can come down with it. It makes really life for fantasy managers a lot harder. And you do need a lot more targets to make up for that lack of, catchability on the other third of those targets. Now, that's probably the biggest question. So I look at the Jets and their general future, and I think about a couple of things, right? So let's say this year goes right, which we're projecting that, of course, Garrett Wilson's going to get this massive upgrade in terms of quarterback. They're going all in. They want to get the Super Bowl win. I have to imagine if they win a Super Bowl, which I'm not betting will happen, but if they do, I have to imagine that Aaron Rodgers is going to want to go out on a high note, right? He's probably dipping so fast before you can say ayahuasca, he's out of there. And then what, right?
I think it's more likely that he just has a down season, Aaron Rodgers, and he's like, yeah, it's not for me anymore. I don't have good feelings about the Jets at all.
I'm not saying this is in the realm of possibility, but what if it was, right? And the Jets suddenly have a pick in the 20 to 32 range, right? you're not in top contention for one of these quarterbacks. Maybe the Jets can be in pursuit of a guy like Dak Prescott. Who knows? Like, he's going to be a free agent in the coming season. But like, so many question marks here for Garrett Wilson, and just in terms of his future, because we've already seen the floor is quite safe, but it's that ceiling you have to worry about for this player that is being drafted as a top 5 dynasty wide receiver right now.
Yeah, his dynasty price is way too high for me. I want in especially at the wide receiver position. They're just treating him like he's shown that he's elite, and I don't think he's shown that. I don't think he has a top tier ceiling that a Justin Jefferson does. And you can go try to trade him right now for one of these rookies that I think does have that ceiling of a Jefferson and Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, even if you have to throw in something else for the Harrison side. So that's what I'm trying to do here. Now, my next guy, I'm a big 49ers supporter, right? So the next guy I wanted to throw in here was Deebo Samuel, because I actually am starting to really like him for redraft this year, but it's just a 1-year thing for me. So I'm not like trying to go get him in dynasty. If I can get him for cheap, sure, and I'm like a contender, maybe. But I was shocked by his finish last year. Finished as a wide receiver 12 overall, wide receiver 9 in points per game. It's just, I mean, we're in 2021, we saw his ceiling. He was a wide receiver 2. And last season, he did that with only 89 targets. I do expect his targets to go back up this year. With Ayuk not in practice this entire summer, who knows when he's back, but it's going to take him some time to get going. Deebo is now being called skinny Deebo again. He's lost a lot of weight. He's back to his weight that he was in 2021 when he dominated. Like, he's not going to be playing as slow down the field. So I really like Deebo this year. But then again, like, it's just for this year, because next year he might not be on the 49ers anymore. And the only time I ever want Deebo Samuel is if he's on the 49ers. They could save nearly $18 million by cutting Deebo post June 1st next offseason. And they might have to do that if they pay Ayuk, they have to pay Brock Purdy, and they're going to have some decisions to make.
That's pretty scary. And another aspect of the Deebo Samuel conversation obviously has to be the age, the health, the rushing upside, which I don't think there's any realm of possibility where Deebo Samuel finishes as highly as he did if it weren't for the extra 225 rushing yards and 5 touchdowns on the ground. And you take that aspect out of his game. Let's say maybe you have fewer of these designed runs. Let's say, he has fewer of these opportunities, which have been so conducive to scoring fantasy points. Like, I could envision a world where, yeah, Deebo Samuel, he's 28 years old. He's not been the healthiest dude. I could, kind of imagine why you'd want to limit some of those touches for him, which, yeah, I want to get out before those touches really start to fall down the tank. One of my favorite guys this year in redraft that I'm not really touching in Dynasty. And to be fair, like, if I'm a contending roster and I want to throw a second or third round pick out for this guy here just to, for a 1-year loaner, I'm totally down. Amari Cooper, wide receiver for the Cleveland Browns, who I'm kind of all in on. We saw last year David Njoku broke out with Joe Flacco, but Amari Cooper was the guy for Deshaun Watson when he was under center. Now, TBD on Deshaun Watson's future, his health, but Amari Cooper and Deshaun Watson were actually one of the most efficient wide receiver quarterback pairings in the National Football League last year. I mean, it doesn't matter what stat you look at, yards per reception on targets from Watson to Cooper, EPA per target, like every advanced metric you can find, these two were ranked top 6. And, I love that for 2024, but who knows what this Browns offense is going to look like in the future. And Amari Cooper, also another year older, he also hasn't been the healthiest in his career.
Yeah, he's 30 years old. I think he has one great year left, and I think it could be a career year. So super high on him in redraft, much higher than I am in Dynasty. He's been solid the last 2 years with the Browns, averaged nearly 15 fantasy points per game. He ranks 12th among wide receivers over the last 2 seasons in points per game. But like you brought up, the connection with Watson has been pretty solid. Last year, Cooper averaged 96 receiving yards per game and 17.6 fantasy points per game in the 5 games that Watson actually played last year. I'm excluding week 7. Watson had 1 completion. Like, that doesn't count as a game played together. But like their connection was really, that's the one guy that Watson could hit. Like the one guy that Watson could actually target. So I am all in on Amari Cooper this year, especially in redraft. Now there's one guy that I'm in on redraft. You're not as much. If I wanted to hit on him very quickly, it's Christian Kirk. Obviously, I'm not excited about him in Dynasty. Like, I don't picture his career lasting super long where he's great, but this year he's a necessity for the Jaguars. And I love his ADP at wide receiver 32. When Ridley wasn't there in 2022 and Christian Kirk was healthy all year, he was the wide receiver 12 in fantasy that season. He led the Jaguars with a career high 84 receptions, 1,108 receiving yards, 8 receiving touchdowns. And it was Christian Kirk last year with Ridley that led the Jaguars in receiving yards from weeks 1 through 13 prior to getting that season-ending core injury. Like, yeah, they drafted Brian Thomas Jr. I think he can be good, solid with those chunk plays. Christian Kirk's going to lead this team in targets. So for this year and this year only, I think they'll probably try to upgrade Christian Kirk the next following offseason. But this year, love his draft price.
I think it's fair. And I've spent most of this offseason kind of looking at Kirk as this guy that I'm okay with at his current price. Not loving the fact that he's already dealing with like a soft tissue injury here after coming off a season-ending core muscle surgery. I want to see him healthy, and the fact that he's not healthy right now, I don't really like to invest in guys that aren't healthy. I do think the future of this offense is going to run through Brian Thomas Jr. And obviously, like in the slot, you've also got Evan Ingram, who plays a crucial role. So like if Christian Kirk isn't fully healthy, I could picture some of those slot snaps going to Evan Ingram, who led the league in, or led all tight ends in terms of like receiving yards, receptions coming out of the slot last year. There are a lot more players that we have to discuss. I want to move on to running backs next that we are targeting in redraft leagues over Dynasty. But first, we'll take a quick break. This episode of Locked On Dynasty Football is brought to you by the Game Time app. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for all the fun you'll have at your favorite events. Michelle, you and I, big Pittsburgh Steelers fan, even though I know you're a 49ers quote-unquote supporter, and a big part of that Steelers fandom and feeding into that fandom is obviously attending the games. And when we lived in downtown Pittsburgh, we loved to go to Steelers games, but we're not necessarily the best planners when it comes to our schedule. So whenever we wanted Steelers tickets, all we had to do, open up the Game Time app, find whatever seats we're looking for. You get a live preview of the seats you're picking out and exactly what kind of view you're going to get. You buy tickets in a matter of seconds. It's 2 taps. The tickets go directly to your phone. You don't even have to dig through your email when you're waiting in the ticket line. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. You download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Again, you just create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDON for $20 off. Terms apply. Last minute prices guaranteed. Welcome back into the Locked On Dynasty Football podcast, and thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, please head over, listen to the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast, get daily insights to the best fantasy football draft strategies from my co-host today, Michelle Magdziuk, and her co-host, Vinny Iyer, so you can dominate your leagues this season. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Michelle, let's get into some running backs that we're targeting in redraft instead of Dynasty. No names quite as spicy here as Garrett Wilson, but I think we have a couple of names that are going to check some boxes. Let's start off by talking about Tampa Bay Bucs running back Rachaad White.
Yeah, so a lot of running backs you're going to be higher on in redraft and dynasty, right? Especially when you're starting up your dynasty draft, you're more leaning towards wide receivers. I totally get that, but we're just talking about running backs that did well for you last year, especially here with Rachaad White. He finished as a running back 6 overall, but he played all 17 games, right? So on a weekly basis, you didn't feel that impact as much. He was a running back 14 in points per game. He did get it going in the second half of the season. My thing with Rachaad White is I'm happy to take him this year because they didn't do all too much to replace him. I think Bucky Irving could maybe get in there, steal some receptions. Maybe White doesn't get 336 touches again, but he's going to get a lot of receptions. He's going to be used around the goal line. But my issue is if, again, this rushing attack stinks for the Buccaneers. They were dead last year in the league. They couldn't run the ball like at all. They averaged 3.4 yards per carry as a team, atrocious. Like, I think they're going to keep looking to upgrade Rachaad White. I'm shocked he kept his job this offseason, but since he did keep his job, totally down to draft him and redraft. Want no part of him in Dynasty at all.
Yeah, I really worry about sort of the long-term outcome for Rachaad White. I'm going to read off some percentiles of his stable metrics via PFF. 7th percentile PFF rushing grade over the past 2 seasons, 24th percentile among all running backs in missed forced tackles per attempt, ranked 55th out of 59 running backs in terms of yards after contact per attempt. Like pretty much any advanced metric that you can look at in terms of his rushing efficiency has been extremely poor. Now, you mentioned the offensive line. I don't really think that got much better. You mentioned the addition of Bucky Irving, who I said coming out, it kind of had this very redundant skill set with Rachaad White, right? Like you pretty much draft him to be your, PPR machine kind of receiving running back. And that's exactly what Rachaad White is. So like Rachaad White, in terms of his overall efficiency, hasn't been great. You look at the fact that there's a guy on the offense who is, kind of a little bit of a carbon copy. They're different players, but like skill sets are similar. Yeah, the pathway for Rachaad White losing his job long-term here in this offense feels pretty reasonable.
Yeah, after I think his job's pretty safe this season, but maybe as the season goes on, Bucky Irving gets a few more snaps, shows something, and then I do think they're going to upgrade Rachaad White either way after this offseason or after this season. Now, another guy like Devin Singletary gets a job as a starter for a team, and it's because the Giants there was nobody out there, right? They're desperate, and they go and grab Devin Singletary. I actually
he has
think
a heartbeat. He's a warm body.
Yeah, I think he's a solid player. Like, I really do. I don't know if I wouldn't want him to be my workhorse, but that's what it seems like he's going to be this year for the Giants. Like, he's going to get a ton of carries. They used him around the goal line in this preseason game with the starters, and he got in, right? The first time he didn't, the second time he did. Like, if they're going to start using him around the goal line, and he's going to get the receptions, even though he hasn't been a great receiving back either, but Daniel Jones loves to check down and throw to his running backs. And last year, when we saw Devin Singletary get the majority of the work in the Texans backfield, he was solid. He averaged 13.2 points per game from weeks 10 through 18. That was running back 17 during that span. So I like his redraft cost. You can get him in like the 10th, 11th, 12th round. Like, he is falling deep, and he's a guy that's going to get a ton of touches. Now, I don't expect Devin Singletary to be the starting running back for the Giants come 2024. He'll still be, or 2025. He'll still be on the team because his contract's 3 years long. They would lose money if they cut him next year, but I fully expect them to try to find an upgrade next offseason.
Yeah, and even when Brian Daboll was with the Buffalo Bills, like Devin Singletary was the RB1. Obviously, they drafted Zach Moss to kind of work into that rotation. But like, just given his size, everything about Devin Singletary, he's not really built in the workhorse vein overall. He's not, like you mentioned, the best receiver. He doesn't have the size, athleticism combination that you kind of want in that RB1 for your team. So yeah, love Devin Singletary is a volume-based option. We don't necessarily know how good the Giants are going to be. I think we have a pretty good idea, and the answer is not good. But in terms of, targets up for grabs, this offense is wide open behind Malik Neighbors. So again, even though he hasn't been the most efficient receiver, that could be a place where he can also carve out a role as a dump off option for Daniel Jones instead of chucking the ball in the middle of the air for a pick six. Like, it could be worse. Another guy we should talk about, James Conner, who I absolutely love, coming off probably the most underrated running back season in recent memory. Like, James Conner absolutely dominated in 2023, but not getting a ton of hype because he is heading into his age 29 season. Like, that doesn't look great, but he had 1,000 rushing yards for the first time in his entire career last year, averaged 5 yards per carry. Even though this offense wasn't good, averaged a career high 3.93 yards after contact per attempt, most 10 plus rushes of 10 plus rushing yards of his career, most missed forced tackles of his career. Like, he dominated in pretty much every area of the field last year. He's a capable receiving option. He's the clear-cut RB1, but he's 29. And you know what? One of my favorite prospects in this class, Trey Benson, is there in the waiting. I know you're not as big a Trey Benson fan, but like, when Connor is on the field, he is going to be RB1. It's just a question of like, what happens if he does get injured? Because he's never played a full season in his career. That might be the end of him in the Arizona Cardinals offense. But man, when he's on the field, he's going to be a value.
And that's why I love him for a redraft, because his price right now bakes in that risk, right? You're able to grab him in the 6th round, and he has been a top 10 running back in each season that he's been with the Cardinals. Running back 10 in points per game last year, running back 10 in 2022, running back 6 in points per game in 2021. He was a running back 1 last year from weeks 13 through 18 once Kyler Murray got back and had his feet under him. Like, he's going to dominate with Kyler Murray back there. But if you have him in Dynasty and you're not a strong contender, you need to sell him, right? You need to trade him, move on. Whether maybe he doesn't have the highest value at this moment, but as soon as he starts having a couple big games during the season, trade him if you're not a contender, because as soon as he gets hurt, like you said, he's going to get hurt sooner or later. I'm fine with that in redraft, like if he misses a few games, but sell him on the high as soon as he breaks out. And then that's kind of my thing with my last guy too here, Jerome Ford with the Browns. I think he's a really solid value in redraft. Grab him in the 10th round. I think he's a solid RB2. We saw him be a solid RB2 last year when he was the starter, scored the 14th most fantasy points among running backs from weeks 2 through 18 without Chubb there. Chubb's still on the PUP list. Like, we don't know when he's coming back. I think Jerome Ford, even when Chubb does come back, is going to get a lot of playing time. He's still going to be the pass catching back. He saw 63 targets last season, 4th most on the Browns. Chubb has never been that pass catching back. And who knows what Chubb can handle this year. So I really like Jerome Ford as well. But if Ford starts having a couple good games, or if you can sell him now for any draft picks next year, do it, especially if you're not a contender.
I do love the Jerome Ford call out, especially considering like even the running backs behind Jerome Ford on the depth chart here for the Cleveland Browns have been banged up here through training camp. So like, it might just be like Jerome Ford is the only body healthy in the city of Cleveland at start of week 1. Like, that's not outside the realm of possibility. I do want to again call out that receiving total you mentioned, 63 targets on the year. That's a lot of targets. Converted 5 of those 44 receptions into receiving touchdowns. Was so sneakily productive, like probably one of the sneakiest potential PPR values in leagues this year, just given that target share. Like, if you asked me off the top of my head before I had done, significant research in terms of my fantasy projections for this year, how many targets Jerome Ford had last year, I probably would have said 35 to 45, somewhere in that range. 63 targets? That's madness.
Yeah, I think he gets it again. Like, it's not top tier like a Breece Hall target share, but for someone that splits the backfield, like, he still split it last year with Kareem Hunt. It's not like he got all the snaps and all of a sudden, like, he's gonna still split the backfield with Chubb. And Chubb is not coming in and getting a huge workload. It's not going to happen. That was a devastating knee injury. I think he's already 29 years old. Nick Chubb, like, it's not going to happen. Jerome Ford is a very, very good value in redraft this year. But again, even if like maybe Chubb comes back towards the end of the season, looks like his old self, then he'll take over the role, right, for next year. And if he doesn't, they're going to upgrade. They're not going to go into a season again with just Jerome Ford. So that's why I'm not interested in Ford in Dynasty. But we have quarterbacks. We got 3 quarterbacks to talk about that I love in redraft this year, but I'm not trying to stick with them too long in Dynasty.
But we'll talk about those next.
This episode is sponsored by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. If you have never experienced the NFL Sunday Ticket experience, I mean, it's legitimately everything. My Sundays are spent watching Red Zone and all the different games I have up on my screens because of the Sunday Ticket. I can't imagine watching football any other way. But also, if you want to figure out a bet to place that $5 bet, an easy one is the Pittsburgh Steelers to win over 8.5 games this year at plus 115 odds. By the way, Mike Tomlin doesn't have losing seasons, period. Like, he's not going to have a losing season. It's never going to happen. So visit fanduel.com/lockedon, get that bet in, and download America's #1 sportsbook.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty podcast. We are here with Michelle Magdziuk. We are highlighting some of the players that we are not so excited about in Dynasty that we are targeting aggressively in redraft leagues. We talked about running backs. We talked about wide receivers. Now it's time to talk about some quarterbacks, and we're going to sneak one tight end into the mix here. Michelle, which quarterback are you fading in Dynasty that you're targeting the most aggressively here in your redraft leagues?
Dak Prescott, because this man is so underrated this year. He just always falls in drafts, right? But in
It's
redraft,
underrated every year.
you can get him in the 7th round. It doesn't make any sense. And if I wasn't so in love with Kyler Murray, he would be on all my teams. But Kyler Murray is also falling in the 7th round. But I like Kyler Murray in Dynasty as well. Dak, I went in redraft because he's been a top 4 quarterback in points per game in 3 of the last 5 seasons. He was a quarterback 4 in points per game last season, quarterback 1 from week 6 through 18, absolutely dominated. He had the same amount of top 4 finishes as actually had 1 more top 4 finishes than Josh Allen, like dominant. But the Cowboys haven't paid him, and we have no idea what his situation is going to be like after this season. He might go to a new team, and I don't want him for a new team. I want him on the Cowboys, right? For fantasy. If he goes to a new team, a new system, no. So if I can, I don't want him in Dynasty because I think his value could drop off massively after the season. But in redraft, I'm all for it.
Yeah, let's think of the realm of possibilities where Dak Prescott could end up. Are there any teams right now that Dak Prescott would land with and you'd say, ooh, increase in his dynasty value, or no?
No.
Raiders?
Absolutely not. No.
I actually think the Raiders have a pretty sneaky good group of skill position players.
Devontae Adams is going to be 32 years old next year. No,
but
that's not.
Hey, you've got incoming tight end / wide receiver 1 and Brock Bowers. Like, I mean, that's hard to argue with. Michael Mayer. Like, there are some pieces to the puzzle there. Who else could be in the market for a quarterback? Maybe the Pittsburgh Steelers.
And
what if Dak is throwing to George Pickens?
No, nothing will be better than what he has right now with CeeDee Lamb and that Mike McCarthy offense, and them having no running back. Like, that's huge for the Cowboys as well, how pass heavy they are. Their defense being great as well, turning over the ball to put the offense into good position. There's nothing better for Dak.
There's nothing better. I get it. Maybe Mike McCarthy, though, isn't here. I guess if Mike McCarthy is there, they've probably paid Dak. They probably got everything else figured out. The playoff wins. TBD on that. Let's talk about some other quarterbacks here. One of the most interesting names on this list, Daniel Jones, who we just watched. I think he did his very best to complete more passes to the opposing defense than he did his own teammates in the latest preseason game. But I do think has a interesting pathway to occasional QB1 weekly value, but I think probably a pretty decent value in terms of super flex leagues, 2 quarterback leagues in terms of upside. You look at his rushing ability. He posted a top 10 season just 2 years ago. If he continues to run, which he probably does because he also can't pass, that's good for fantasy.
Yeah, and we saw him run in this preseason game, and that's what I wanted to see. He took off and ran up the middle. Like, I wanted to see, was he a little bit worried about the knee? He didn't seem like it. He didn't seem like it at all, and that made me feel much better. Like you said, we're one season removed from Daniel Jones being the quarterback 10 in fantasy, and it's because of his 700 rushing yards and 7 rushing touchdowns in 2022. He only had 15 passing touchdowns. 15. I do think he's going to have one of his better passing yards and passing touchdown season. Yes, he will throw interceptions. He'll make stupid plays, but Malik Neighbors is going to be huge for him. And even if, like, at the end of the year, it's not going to be the prettiest numbers, but I still think with the rushing, with a few more touchdowns because of Malik Neighbors and what he offers and those big plays, he's probably going to be a top 12 fantasy quarterback. And you get him, he's going undrafted, but at least a really good streamer, I think, is his floor this year. But again, the team was already eyeing other quarterbacks this offseason, right? So I like him for this year because he's still the starter. Next season, he might not be anymore unless he improves big time. And he doesn't have to improve big time to be a good fantasy quarterback. That's the beauty of it.
That's the beauty of it because of that rushing upside here. Last quarterback I want to talk about, Jared Goff. I actually like Jared Goff a decent amount in redraft and dynasty, but you're not so sold on his dynasty value.
It's really easy, right? I like him this year because he was a quarterback 7 last season. I like him this year because he gets to play almost every game in a dome, 14 games in a dome. He only has to
That's
play
crazy.
2. Yeah, he's so good in a dome, right? He only has to play 2 outdoor games in the cold this entire season. And one of them is early November in Green Bay. So it might not even be that cold yet. But like, the schedule is amazing for him. So I like that. And once Ben Johnson's gone, I don't want Jared Goff at all. And it's a miracle Ben Johnson, that's the OC of the Lions, is still there this season. He had the opportunity to leave for a head coaching job. He decided to stay. He can't decide to stay forever. He's going to have to take that leap, try to be a head coach. So, like, as long as Ben Johnson's there, cool, I'm happy with Jared Goff. But the second Ben Johnson's gone, I think Jared Goff's value in Dynasty is going to plummet. And I don't want to be holding on to him at that time.
I definitely agree with the point of Ben Johnson. I don't think we didn't even predict that he would be here in the offense for 2024. And in all of my dynasty shares of Jared Goff, are thanking our lucky stars that he had. But I also want to point out the personnel that Jared Goff is going to play with,
amazing,
right?
yeah.
Like, he got paid. He's got Jahmyr Gibbs, very explosive running back to keep the offense going. Also a very capable pass catcher. You've got Sam Laporta, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams, who it sounds like took the next step forward this year. I do think the personnel makes it really hard to undervalue Goff long-term, even if there is some question marks at OC, because they found Ben Johnson. This is a pretty desirable landing spot for like an up and coming OC through the ranks. So like, it's not like one of these systems like the New York Jets, right? Like that, it's not a New York Jets job where it's like, I don't know if that's a job we'd want long term, just given the offense that, the offensive personnel that. No, like, this is one of the best, just all around skilled position player groups in the National Football League. Everybody's going to be busting down the doors. The Lions are going to have their pick of whoever they want at OC in the year to come. So, like, not as worried about Jared Goff. Now, to close out the show, we have to talk about one tight end who might have one of the biggest discrepancies in terms of his value in redraft versus dynasty leagues. The tight end one in redraft ADP right now, Travis Kelce, tumbling down dynasty draft boards. What are you doing with him if you are the Travis Kelce manager?
I think you might just have to hold on to him till he retires, right? But I mean, especially if you're in a startup for Dynasty, I'm really low on him. He's 34. He's about to be 35 years old. Like, it's going to end sooner or later. But in redraft, I still think he's a really solid pick. Like, yes, I would rather Sam Laporta, but now Kelsey's not going as high as he was in previous years because of his fall down last year, at the end of last year. But guys, he was still the tight end 2 in points per game. And we're so upset about that because he didn't do what he normally does, but he was still the tight end 2 in points per game. And this was a difference between being the tight end 1 and the tight end 2. Sam Laporta averaged 11.55 fantasy points per game. Travis Kelce averaged 11.53. fantasy points per game. 0.02 difference. And we're obsessed with Sam Laporta and down on Kelce. Now it makes sense, right? Laporta should keep getting better and better and better because that was his rookie season and an insane rookie season. And Kelce's getting old. But we saw him come back to life. Like, the biggest issue is that he fell apart during the fantasy playoffs, and that killed us, right? 3 terrible games in a row. But then in his actual playoffs, he came back to life and destroyed it. So I still think he has a little bit of juice left in him for this season. But this might be the last good season we get out of Travis Kelce.
I think that's fair. I have a few more concerns, again, just given the fact that, like, this could be Travis Kelce's last season. I think they saw last year, especially, how important he was when he heated up in the second half of the season and finally got healthy. I worry that they're going to treat him with kid gloves a little bit more than they have in years past, just based on the personnel they brought in, the investment they made at the wide receiver position. I feel like they're trying to keep Kelce a little bit more fresh for the postseason, which they inevitably will make and continue to advance round by round through the playoffs. Like, if Travis Kelce is healthy, then they know that's, I think, a ticket to their three-peat. That's my only concern there, but there's no doubt that Travis Kelce is a guy that, like, if you're not a contending roster, if you don't look like you are a contender right now, you need to trade him as soon as possible
Trade
to a
him to that
manager
best
that,
contender, yeah, and he's gonna
yeah,
want Kelce unless he has a Laporta or someone else amazing, but there's not that many amazing tight ends out there. The chances that a strong contender in your league might need a tight end is probably pretty strong, so go give him Travis Kelce. Maybe it's a little bit less than you would have liked from last year, but still get something from him before he retires or he's done so.
I love that. That is it for today's show. Tomorrow, Michelle and I will be back to highlight more players, this time that we're targeting in Dynasty, but not so high on in redraft leagues. Be sure to give Michelle a follow at BallBlastEM. You can follow me at Kate Magdziuk over on X, formerly Twitter. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. Join us again tomorrow, and we will see you soon.
Bye, y'all.